Hi readers, welcome back to Reading Realm. I'm finally getting around to reviewing the book that I mentioned several times in other reviews that I was reading. It's finally time, Sunrise on the Reaping. This is the first book from the Hunger Games series that I have reviewed on the channel, even though I've read all of them. And I've seen the movies of the main trilogy. I have not seen Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And obviously the movie of this one is in development, but is not out yet, so I haven't seen that one either. But I was so excited when I heard this one was coming out that I had to add it to my list and read it immediately. I really enjoyed it. It is a book where, when I went to buy it, the person at the bookstore saw what I was buying and said, "It's so good, but you have to have an entire box of tissues and like 3 days off to recover if you're gonna read it." And I do feel like I got some of that from it. If people are unfamiliar with what this book is the book that is basically in between A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and the main trilogy of the Hunger Games. So this is Haymitch's Hunger Games year. So this is his story, and it is kind of interesting going into this book because if you are familiar with the original Hunger Games, you know who wins this Hunger Games. And because of that, you know going into the book, everyone else is going to die because that's how the Hunger Games work. It's the Hunger Games. And you know from the main trilogy, the only time there has been more than one survivor is in that series, which I'm going to assume people are more familiar with the main trilogy because that's been out for a really long time, so I'm going to be less careful if I say something that would spoil that, just a heads up. But in this one, it's really hard because even though I knew going into it, I was like, don't get too attached because they're gonna die. Some of them are gonna die, all of them are gonna die, except this person. It is so hard not to get attached to them, and even characters that I started off not really liking that much, by the end, like, this author is amazing at writing really emotional death scenes. Both in the arena and not in the arena, which happens in this book, it happens in the main trilogy. It is just so well written, and it is so hard to talk about without spoiling, and I was trying so hard to avoid social media when I was reading it because it was right after it came out and it was just all over everywhere. Everyone was talking about it, and so I kept having to try to avoid everything because everything was trying to give spoilers, and I really didn't want to be spoiled. So I'm gonna do my best to not add to that and not be part of the spoiler for things that are not things that are maybe as obvious as knowing that there can only be one winner, and if you know the original trilogy, you know who that has to be. What I think is really, really fascinating about this one in particular is that it gives more backstory or more presence to some of the characters who appear in Catching Fire, which is very, very cool because I feel like they were so interesting then, but now seeing them in this sense, even though this is, I think this is 25 years before Catching Fire, I'm pretty sure. It's been a while. Because this is the 50th and that's the 75th. Yes. But this one, it makes those characters so much more interesting because seeing them 25 years earlier versus later on and kind of getting to know more about them, specifically Mags, Beatty, and Wiress are in this, and it is really, really interesting. Beatty's part in this book is really hard to read, just because of a dynamic that's happening and why it's happening. And so that's one that I feel like got me more than a lot of the other things that I knew were inevitable, but that one, like, oh, you feel so bad for him, and that is rough to read. But also, then you have so much more admiration for him as a character, especially by Catching Fire, because he's still kind of trying to do the same thing that he was trying to do in this, in a way, which I'm trying to be careful, because even though I said I'm not going to worry too much about giving spoilers for the main trilogy as much, just because it's been out for like a decade or however long. Actually don't know what year those were published, but I don't want to give away too much about that. That would then go back to something similar happens here. But he is such an interesting character in this, and I also I loved Mags and Wiress in the original trilogy. I thought they were really interesting characters, and I thought it was so cool seeing them in this as well. And also you see the younger version of Effie and some of the other characters that are really big in the main trilogy, which I think is really interesting. And also, there are a lot of dynamics in District 12 that you see starting to develop that are so fascinating, either connecting back to A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes or connecting forward to the main Hunger Games trilogy, because you kind of see the dynamics starting to form between the people who will eventually be Katniss's parents, and some other stuff. Like, it's just really interesting having this kind of like a middle book, and I'm really curious if she's gonna write more books like this. I haven't gone out of my way to research if she is or if she's thinking about it, because I'm really curious who it would be about the next time, if there is. I feel like that would be really interesting though, because it's really, really good. It also, I feel like, makes certain things so much more significant in the main series, like little details. One of them that I've seen a lot of people talk about online that I also picked up on is how Haymitch calls Katniss sweetheart, because that seems like it's sort of a reference to this, which is really, really interesting. I also think it's very, very interesting how this book ends, because it feels like it ends in a really, how do I word this? It ends kind of morbidly. I mean, definitely morbidly, but it also ends in like a weird, it's weird because you know how the later trilogy ends, or at least I do because I've read it. People who have read it or watched it have a sense of how that ends. And so you kind of know what's going to happen later. And so it's this really interesting kind of dynamic of like seeing where it ends versus like that ending is it's very, very interesting. And I also just love I feel like every time, every book, the arena design is so interesting and so unique. And I feel like that's really morbid because obviously the arena is not a good place. It's not really politically correct to say it's cool, because it's not. The Hunger Games as a concept are not cool. Like, the event itself. The books, I think, are cool. But the event itself is, I feel like, pretty universally understood to not be a good thing. But also, the arena design is so interesting every time that I'm really excited to get to that part of the book to see that, because that is, I feel like, one of the things that makes this book really interesting in the sort of, I feel like the original trilogy came out with some other big dystopian series. I feel like Divergent came out around the same time, and some others like that, where it's like they're dystopian, but they're real world dystopian. And this is like real world dystopia that then goes into this really surreal, fully fabricated game. And I think that that's what sets it apart from a lot of other dystopian young adult fiction that came out around the same time. And this one obviously came out this year, so this is newer, but still part of the same universe. It's just very, very interesting because I feel like there's so much where it's like, okay, that is something where that is just completely unique compared to the other arenas from the other books. And the way that all kind of works together, it's really exciting, even though it's morbid and bad and you know what's gonna happen. It is really interesting. And I also like how this book, I feel like, gives Haymitch more credit for the rebellion than I feel like the original trilogy did. And I feel like he did help a lot, and he was a really important part in the original trilogy, obviously. He's a really important character, he's a really big character. I feel like various other characters would not be alive if he wasn't there. He's very important, and I don't think that anyone can dispute that. But in this, it shows that he had these thoughts and intentions and goals or dreams of wanting to mess stuff up for the Capitol 25 years before things actually started fully working to do that. And I think that that's really cool because it shows, and not only him, also Beetzy, he was also really important to that, but it's like things like that I feel like are so nice to see because these characters who by the main trilogy are not the protagonists, they're older, they're kind of more of like the important but kind of a little bit more background characters. You can see how they worked so hard for this to set that up. And a couple other characters too. It's not just them, but some of them I don't want to say too much because it kind of gets more into spoiler territory because earlier on in the book it's kind of unclear motives of certain characters. But it's really, really good. I highly recommend it. And I highly recommend the whole series if you haven't read that either. I think if you are completely new to the series, I would recommend reading them in chronological order rather than publishing order, just because I feel like if you read it in publishing order, you already know a lot of the results of this one, which is okay. I mean, I feel like a lot of people read it in publishing order because they read it when it initially came out, and then as the 2 prequels have come out, they've read those as well. But if you're completely new, start with Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, read Sunrise on the Reaping, then read the trilogy. And if you are a fan of some of the other books and have read them and haven't read this, I do recommend it. Be prepared, it is rough. There are a couple of really rough death scenes. And I feel like that's kind of expected in this series. But there are some definite intense scenes, which I think were so well written, but they will cause emotional damage. But let me know what you thought if you've read this. Try to avoid spoilers as much as you can in the comments. Let me know what you're reading. If you are reading anything cool right now, let me know. I'd love to hear it. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. It would really help me out. And keep reading. Bye!